So with this ON1 Live webinar, we're going to be talking about quick and practical portrait workflows inside Photo RAW 2021. With Photo RAW 2021, you have all of those tools that you're used to within Photo RAW, such as the raw processing, the masking of the effects and the local adjustments, layers, all of the amazing tools that you're used to. But now ON1 Portrait AI is going to be integrated into Photo RAW, so you can use all of those tools with your portraits and use the AI technology that's available to retouch and process them as well. So let's get started here. We're just going to jump into a few portraits and I'll show you guys the latest features inside Photo RAW 2021. Within Photo RAW 2021, it really is, at the heart of it, a raw processing engine. So it allows you to pull out all of the different tonalities within your shot in just an instant. If you want to bring out shadow tones within your shot, if you want to bring out mid-tones within your image, it really makes it seamless in modifying any different tonalities and colors within your shot. So with portraits, if I don't want to go in and modify many of the tonalities and colors, I can just do it automatically with this AI Auto button here. By choosing AI Auto here, see how it's automatically developed all of the tone and color settings for me in my shot. So with one click, I basically have a developed portrait. Now with a processed portrait like this, I can see all of the details within my shot. It's much easier to view all of the skin textures and all of the little nuances within this image just by hitting that AI Auto button. Now, if you're more of a dive deep into an edit type person, you can avoid that button entirely and you can use this tone and color area to process the basic tones within your shot. So with ON1 Photo RAW 2021, we have the ability to use different camera profiles on our image, but keep in mind that these camera profiles are only available on RAW photographs. If you shoot a photograph with a JPEG file, it's already processed and you can't modify the camera profile. Not a big deal, you can still use the raw processing engine inside Photo RAW to develop your JPEGs, but shooting in RAW just gives you this extra ability to modify some of the look. So if you're shooting in RAW, one thing I do with my portraits is I go to this camera profile and I go to ON1 Portrait. And just like that, if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, it brings out all of the basic tones, removes a lot of that stark contrast, and alleviates some of the darker shadows in my shot in, again, one click. So there's many different ways to modify a portrait inside Photo RAW 2021. You could modify the camera profile, you could choose AI Auto. There's also AI Match, which if you're shooting in RAW and you have a camera profile set on your DSLR camera, it will match that look that you saw on the back of your camera when you were shooting. So let's say you're shooting with a Fuji camera and you're using their black and white in-camera processing. You can choose AI Match and it will match that black and white processing on the back of your camera. It's really helpful if you're shooting in different styles on the back of your DSLR. Now, if I don't want to use any camera profiles and I'm just shooting with a JPEG, I'll just go to ON1 Standard here. And now let's say that we want to brighten up this photograph. Well, we could just head down to our midtones. Midtones are those middle grays, basically those skin tones. Just pull those up. And there we go. With just one slider, we've pulled out those middle grays within our image and set a foundational look for our shot. Now we can fine tune it even more. Let's add in maybe a little bit of contrast. I'll pull up on those shadow tones just a hair. And I think we could maybe cool this image down just a bit. Just like that. So with using ON1 Photo RAW's raw processing, it's incredibly easy to go in and process a portrait before you actually start retouching it with Portrait AI. So if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard now, that's basically 3 incredibly easy ways that you can pull out all of the basic tones in your shot with very minimal effort. So let me just crop this real quick so that we have a more defined portrait. I'm just going to use a 1x1. I'll just pull this over here. That looks pretty good. There we go. Now we're a little bit more zoomed in on our portrait. So within Photo RAW 2021, or coming soon to Photo RAW 2021, we have this ON1 Portrait AI. Now, if you're familiar with ON1 Portrait AI and you've been using it, you know how powerful it can be with retouching portraits. Now, ON1 Portrait AI is available right now to download and to purchase. And if you purchase ON1 Portrait AI, you actually get ON1 Photo RAW 2021 when it comes out later this month. So inside Portrait AI, it automatically develops, or inside Portrait AI, it automatically finds all of the faces within your portrait and applies just the right amount of skin retouching to it. So if I click on this Portrait AI tab here, it's going to search through my portrait, it's going to find the faces within my image, and I can use one mask to completely retouch and revamp any of the facial features within my image. So it's already found my portrait, I can see it's found the face, and if I go into my masking, I can see it's created a little mask there strictly around her facial features. So it's identified her facial features for me without having me to go in and mask on anything or pick and choose where her facial features are at. And it's also done that to the eyes and her mouth as well, so if I need to brighten up those features, it does it automatically for me. So if I choose this, the mouth right here, or if I choose the eyes and I hover over, it's already found the eyes on my shot. If I click on this mouth icon and I hover over it, it's already found her lips on the image for me. This is incredibly helpful if you want to just go in and retouch the portrait without actually having to choose what areas that you're retouching on. So right off the bat, it's found the portrait, it's retouched it for me. So if I turn this portrait filter off and on, actually let's zoom in real quick. If I turn this portrait filter off and on, you can see it's boosting a little bit of detail in those eyes and it's smoothing out the skin here. Now I know we're going through zoom, so I'm going to boost it up a little bit strong. We can always pull back the opacity, but just because we're going through a webinar, might as well just make it intense. So inside the Portrait AI filter now, we have this one retouching slider that we can use to control all of the details within our skin retouching. So this one retouching slider controls all of these detail sliders here. And if you're familiar with Photo RAW in the past, you're probably familiar with the old version of retouching, which is the surface blur version. We have this new retouch method, which is frequency separation, which you're probably more aware of in the latest kind of portrait trends, where it's more of that airbrushed, natural looking retouch. So with this retouching slider, I can just pull up on this, and that's just going to add in more retouching to my portrait here. Now keep in mind that this retouching doesn't modify any of these areas below the detail, so it's only modifying the blemish removal, the smoothing, the detail, the texture, the shine, things like that. It's not modifying any of these facial feature sliders, it's only modifying this detail section. So I've pulled up on it quite a bit, so I have a bit more retouching going on. Let me just make it a little more strong. I'm going to pull up on the blemishes, and you can see that by pulling up on that blemish, it's concealing all of the imperfections on the skin. So just like that, it does an awesome job of smoothing out that skin and removing any of those imperfections within my shot. I'm just going to add a little bit of detail back into the scene, and that's going to add some texture back into her skin. So just like that, in a few clicks, we've really revamped and retouched her skin and smoothed out everything within the portrait. One thing I love about the ON1 Portrait AI filter is the ability to brighten up facial features. So if you have a darker image, let's say our portrait here, I'll just pull back on the exposure. So we have a darker portrait, I'll zoom out too. So let's say we have a darker portrait here. It's a little underexposed, but I do like how the shadow is kind of moody in the background, and I kind of like how it's underexposed because we can always go in and pull up on the brightness of her face just by using our Portrait AI filter. So if I click Portrait AI here, I can go into my face option and I can just pull up on the brightness. And just like that, I'm modifying that specific area and nowhere else on my image. So it's really incredibly helpful if you just need to add in a little bit of light to the facial features and nowhere else. So just like that, with this one filter, it's doing all of that to my portrait. And we haven't even modified the eyes or any of the other facial features. We've only brightened up the face and smoothed out the skin. So it's a very, very powerful tool, a very, very powerful tool for portrait photographers looking to retouch their portraits. So we brightened up our face a bit. Now there's a few different areas we can modify as well. Let me just zoom in real quick. Now, these three areas, these three sliders, the slim face, the left eye size, and the right eye size, those are kind of pick and choose sliders. You don't have to do those to every single portrait. These would be the sliders to choose if your client comes to you and says, hey, I want to look a little thinner in the frame, or my eye looks a little wonky in that one scene because of the angle. You can always go and adjust those things with this area on their Portrait AI filter. So if your client's looking to be a bit thinner in the frame, you can just pull up on this slim face option, and that's going to slim her face down and modify the structure of the portrait. So now if I turn this off and on, it's slimming the face down a bit and it's smoothing it out. Now, again, this is kind of pick and choose. You don't have to do this to every single portrait, but if a client does come to you and asks for that specific adjustment, you can always just apply it right off the bat. And with this portrait, I think the eyes are pretty similar in size. One thing we could do is pull up on the right eye size and maybe even that eye size out with the left one. But that's being very nitpicky. Again, it's just a slider that you can choose if your client is looking for those types of adjustments or if you see that within your shot. So in just a few sliders, we've really modified this portrait. And the great thing about this, again, is that it identifies all of the facial features within your portrait, and you don't have to do anything to mask them on or pick where they're at. It just does it automatically. So with my eyes here, if I want to brighten up the eyes, I can just add in some whitening to them. Again, I'm going to go a little bit too intense just because we're going through a webinar. I could add in some detail. And we can also brighten up those dark circles under the eyes and add detail to the brows to really enhance our portrait. So if I want to remove some of the tiredness or the tired look from the eyes, I can just pull up on this dark circles option, and that's going to remove any dark circles from beneath her eyes and really just make all of the textures and her skin tones even. I can also enhance the eyebrows. I don't think these eyebrows need much of it, but you can see it does a great job of adding in some detail and some contrast to the eyebrows. So if I turn this off and on now, again, it's pretty intense, but just to show you the capabilities, it does a phenomenal job at smoothing out the skin, removing the blemishes, adding in detail to any of the areas that you want. It's a very, very powerful tool. And we haven't even modified her mouth yet. So let's go in here, let's just add in a little bit more vibrance to her lips so they're a little more red. And then I'm going to take this hue down, or take it up rather, and make it a little brighter of a red color. Perfect. So just like that, it's doing an awesome job of finding the face, retouching all of the areas, and I didn't have to go in and identify any of the facial features. It just does it automatically. So realistically, without having to go in and show each of these sliders, it could take a portrait photographer less than a minute to fine-tune an entire portrait. And because you can sync those settings across any number of images you want, you can retouch an entire shoot literally in seconds. So with this portrait here, I'm just going to stylize real quick now that we've brought out the foundational look and smoothed out the skin. Let me just see our levels here to see what we're looking at. If it's underexposed. Oh, so it's a little underexposed. Let's just pull up on our exposure again. And then I'll remove some of that brightness from the face. Oops. There we go. That looks a bit more even now. So this is the original that we were working with, and this is the photograph that we've created in just a few clicks. So let's just go and stylize real quickly with a preset. I'm just gonna head over to my preset drawer, and inside of our preset drawer, there's hundreds of awesome presets we can apply to our image to stylize it. Now, one of my favorite presets is this minimalist preset category, just because it's very moody and sort of Instagram-esque. And I really like just grabbing this M11. It's gonna sort of moody things up a bit, just like that. And the great thing about applying presets in Photo RAW is you can lower down the opacity or the strength of that preset. So if I grab this fade slider, I can just pull back on the fade to about 50% or so. And if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, just like that, we have a much more interesting portrait, and it's completely retouched and processed inside Photo RAW 2021. So it's all of these tools inside Photo RAW 2021 really make it incredibly handy to process your portrait and develop the image. And then with Portrait AI, it's just perfect for retouching and removing any sort of blemishes from the skin. So that's our first edit. Let's see if there's any questions here. So Stuart was asking about the mask being inverted with our Portrait AI filter, and it can be inverted. Now, I wouldn't recommend inverting it in and adding any more portrait adjustments with that filter, but you can copy and paste this filter that is created, or copy and paste this mask that is created to apply adjustments. So if I want to darken the background around my face or brighten up the background or add details around my face, I can go into my masking options. I can copy this mask, right? Let's just go into maybe my local adjustments. Let's just maybe make a vignette, if you will. I'll just keep my exposure at -1. And then I'm just going to go into my masking options. I'll paste the mask, and then I can just invert it. And obviously, it looks a little bit crunchy, but we can just pull up on our feathering. That's going to feather it all the way. And now we can just lower the opacity here. And now we're just modifying all of the areas around that face, and it's not adjusting the face at all. It's only adjusting the areas around it. So that's a great question, Stuart. Yes, you can invert the mask, and you can copy those masks from your Portrait AI filter. You can paste them onto different things. I would again recommend pulling up on that feathering, because if you leave it down, it's going to be a little bit crunchy. So just pull up on that feathering. You can even pull it up all the way to 100. That looks pretty decent like that. And then, yeah, so just like that. Really great job of just darkening the background and leaving the face kind of separated from it. Okay, so let me go into my catalog folders and let's go into my selects here. Cool, so we got these portraits here of my friend Bree. I'm just gonna go into the edit module. And like I was saying earlier, Photo RAW 2021 has all of these amazing photo editing tools and capabilities inside of it. So really, to edit a portrait, there's nothing you can't do inside Photo RAW. There's literally nothing you can't do to an image or a portrait inside Photo RAW. And then you add on Portrait AI to it, and you have a whole different world of retouching and processing at the same time. Again, I'm just going to go to this AI Auto. It seems to do a pretty great job of just pulling out those basic tones, and then I'm going to choose ON1 Portrait, just like that. So we have a bit more even of an exposure, just like that, and that's just by using AI Auto and then my camera profile ON1 Portrait. Again, you can do it in many different ways, but this is just a pretty fast way. AI Auto develops the basic tones, ON1 Portrait alleviates some of the shadows. Bada bing, bada boom, we have a correctly exposed portrait here. So now we can go into Portrait AI. Again, it's just going to find all of the faces in that image, and it's automatically going to apply any retouching to them. So let me zoom in. It's a little far. Let's go to about 75. There we go. So now if I turn this portrait filter off and on, you can see it just in an instant by clicking that Portrait AI filter, it's applied the perfect amount of retouching to the skin, and it's a bit subtle over a webinar, but if you're looking at my screen, it's very, very nice on the portrait. So because we're in a webinar, I'm just going to boost up the retouching quite a bit. I'm just going to pull up on this slider, and then I'm going to add in some blemish removal, some detail, and that should be perfect just like that. Now I'm going to add in a little bit of brightness to the face, just a hair, and then I'm going to whiten up the eyes a hair, add in some detail, and I'll remove any of those any of those dark circles from underneath the eyes with this slider. I can enhance the brow, and then let's just add some vibrance to her lips. Boom. So now if we turn off this filter, does an amazing job at retouching the skin, adding in details to those facial features, and just completely revamping this portrait. So inside Photo RAW 2021, we can actually batch process this shoot in seconds by applying these same retouching settings to our images. So I can just hit F on my keyboard. I can grab all of these images here. I can choose sync. We'll make sure that we have these selected, and we'll just choose apply. But you can see already it's finding these faces within my shot, and it's applying skin retouching to them, and it's also brightening up the basic tones in the image as well. So if we go into a couple of these shots, I'll just go into this shot here. So if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, just like that, that's going to be all of these images from my shoot. So if I go to the next photograph, I pull this down, And there we go. And it's done a great job on this one too, because that's an incredibly dark photograph. If I zoom out here and I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, that's an incredibly dark photograph. And if I go into Portrait AI, it's found that face right there and it's applied that brightness, and now we have that shot. So incredibly handy tool if you're looking to batch process a group of photographs, or even just go in and completely revamp and retouch one portrait. All of the tools you need to do that are inside ON1 Photo RAW 2021 and ON1 Portrait AI.